It is my pleasure to introduce and welcome Jeff Breau. Jeff and I became acquainted when Jeff was living and working in Taos with the Neem Karoli Baba Ashram and became active with the Taos Interfaith Gathering, a collection of faith leaders from many different faith traditions who are active in Taos. Jeff is now living outside of Taos, but has graciously agreed to come on and talk about his faith journey and some experiences and beliefs of the Hindu tradition of which he practices. So welcome, Jeff. It's a delight to have you.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Yeah, it's a delight to be here, and namaste to everybody in the congregation and who's watching on YouTube. That was a great introduction. Like Sherry said, I was formerly in Taos, living and serving at the Neem Karoli Baba Ashram there. And it's a delight to be able to speak to you all. And Sherry and I, really did a lot together on the Interfaith Council, which for me was one of the highlights of my time in Taos. And so to be able to speak a little bit about my tradition and the Hindu tradition more broadly and my faith specifically is really a privilege. I wanted, before sort of diving into any of the meat of this talk, to just note that Hinduism, like so many traditions, is very vast. Hinduism is considered one of the oldest religions, if not the oldest religion, going back 4,000 plus years in a similar form to the form it's in now. But over that 4,000 years, the Hindu tradition has evolved and taken many different paths. And there's many different paths which view the reality of our world slightly differently. And so my tradition, which is what's called a Vaishnava tradition, which views the deity Vishnu as sort of the main focus of attention. That Vaishnava tradition, and more specifically, a devotee of the Hindu guru Neem Karoli Baba, that is one of many traditions. And I'll try and note, just as I'm talking a little bit, some of the other traditions and names people may have heard of, but I wanted to call out and signpost the fact that I am speaking from one of many traditions and really speaking from my own perspective, which, as an American, I was born in the United States and was not born into a Hindu household by any extent. My father is Catholic. My mom is Christian. I was not raised with any specific religion. And so I sort of found Hinduism quite late in my life, and found and developed my relationship with my guru, Neem Karoli Baba, relatively late in my life. So my experience will differ, and does differ greatly, from somebody who, say, was born in India, which is where 95% of Hindu people who practice Hinduism live. That's sort of where Hinduism originated in the Indian subcontinent, and it's where sort of the main worship is done in India. So, sort of with that disclaimer, I wanted to, I think, start, since Sherry was asking to speak about my own path as well as sort of Hinduism more generally, I wanted to root my path and faith tradition, and the faith tradition of many people at the Neem Karoli Baba Ashram in Taos, root that in Hinduism more generally. So the Vaishnava tradition is considered part of the yogic tradition of Hinduism. And many of you may be familiar with yoga. It's something that is taken off in the United States and in the West, and has become very popular. What we tend to think of as Americans as being yoga is really one facet of a much larger yogic tradition. Yoga, which comes from a Sanskrit root meaning to yoke, is a set of philosophies and practices which are really focused on connecting oneself to God. And in the United States, yoga, as a lot of people think of it, is focused on movements and body positions and practices, which are called asanas. And that is one part like I said, this larger yogic tradition. And it's actually a very, very small part of my personal faith practice. It's also a very small part of what the ashram in Taos does, and a very small part of what Neem Karoli Baba talked about. Maybe just because I thought of it, but to know one thing, Neem Karoli Baba was a Hindu saint, mystic, who died or left his body, as we sort of say, in 1973. And so his teachings live on. I am too young to have ever met him in the body, at least in this lifetime. And so all of my experiences and connection with him come from stories that devotees have told, both Western devotees. There were many Western people from the United States who went and met with Maharaji and had their lives changed by their connection with him. And then there are many Indian devotees who have told stories and written books about their experiences with Maharaji. So, and then of course there's the lived experience of a connection with a guru who is not in his body. And so through spiritual community, what in our tradition is called satsang, through that spiritual community and through dreams and experiences, I have a lived connection with Maharaji, also known as Neem Karoli Baba. Sorry, Maharaji is sort of a term of respect and is often what Neem Karoli Baba is referred to as. But my connection with Neem Karoli Baba is sort of vast, even though I never met him in the body. Neem Karoli Baba, the way that he taught and what he taught was coming through this yogic tradition largely. And the yogic tradition really has a number of different components, but the main focus of it is sort of as an experiential mystical practice, meaning that unlike some other Hindu lineages, the focus is really on what are ways that you as an individual person can experience, know, and recognize your true nature as a part of God or as God. Yoga, unlike say another Hindu tradition with Advaita Vedanta, which maybe some of you have heard of, that's another pretty common and well-known Hindu lineage. Advaita Vedanta is non-dual, meaning that everything is viewed of as God. Yoga is sort of dualistic in that there's a separation between matter and spirit. Like with Christian denominations, Protestantism, Catholicism, all of the different sub-traditions, there's a lot of interweaving. And so the yogic tradition that I'm a part of is actually probably better considered as non-dual, meaning that ultimately everything is viewed of as God, as a manifestation of the unmanifest. But then in practice, it's sort of in the day-to-day, in terms of how one comports one's life, one may look to a deity or a God as something that feels separate from them in that moment, even though ultimately the belief is that it's all the same. All of that is just to say that there's sort of a lot of scholarship and metaphysical philosophy that goes into the Hindu tradition, and a lot of different ways of viewing that. It's not actually that important to my day-to-day, even though it's something that I'm interested in and think about. What's more important sort of to my day-to-day and to a lot of people who are practicing Hindus day-to-day is how does our faith inform how we move through the world? And as I'm talking about some of these practices, people who listened to Colleen's talk last week about Buddhism might notice a lot of similarities. And that's because Buddhism and Hinduism have a very long history together. Buddhism arose from Hindu culture, much like Christianity arose from a Jewish culture. And once Buddhism sort of arose as a distinct tradition, it was in conversation with a lot of Hindu tradition. And yoga in particular pulls a lot from Buddhist ideas and vice versa. And so there's a lot of similarities, even though some of the core ideas are a little bit different, or the ways of viewing it at least are different, even if maybe there's actually a lot more similarity than it would seem. So just quickly, within yoga, there's a number of different paths, but the four sort of main paths are bhakti, jnana yoga, raja yoga, and karma yoga. And those different yogas are different flavors, if you will, of practice and of how one moves through the world and what one does to develop and cultivate a deep relationship with God. Bhakti yoga and karma yoga are the two practices that most align with my being. Bhakti yoga is a devotional practice. I think it's fair to consider the way that a lot of people's relationship with Jesus looks like, to consider that sort of a bhakti tradition, which is a cultivation of love through connection with God and through connection with a personification of God. In the Hindu tradition, what would be called an avatar of God. That is sort of, and so bhakti involves a lot of chanting. Devotional chanting involves a lot of puja or worship, offerings to God, offering of yourself to God as an instrument of love and an instrument of sort of the divine. The other major path that I follow is karma yoga, which is karma is in this sense is sort of meaning action, and it's sort of meaning what are you doing with your works. And a major practice in karma yoga is what's called seva, or selfless service, which is the idea of using your energy and your body and your time to be of service to the whole of humanity, to the whole of the universe. And what that looks like varies based on an individual's temperament, on their history, on their, maybe what in our tradition, what you would think of as sort of their past lives, what those sort of enabled them to do or to need to do in this lifetime. Maharaji Neem Karoli Baba, my guru, really emphasized for people karma yoga based around feeding people. One of his core teachings was feed everyone, and the idea being that you use your time and energy to provide nourishment to your fellow man, and use that not just as an act of niceness, but actually as a way that you are connecting to and seeing God in everyone. Seeing God in yourself and seeing God in all of the people that you are interacting with. The Raja Yoga, just really briefly, because it's so often thought of, Raja Yoga is what people traditionally think of as yoga in the United States. So it's meditation, things like meditation, physical postures, austerities like fasting. Those fall into sort of a Raja Yoga practice and are really centered on connecting with God through a separation of the mind, of the ego, from the spirit, just at a high level. Let's see. So the other thing that I wanted to touch on really quickly, just in terms of Hinduism and ideas that folks may have heard about or thought about, is the Hindu pantheon and the different deities that exist within Hinduism. This is an area where recognizing the different strands of Hinduism is important, because there are many different ways that people think about God and gods in Hinduism. There are branches of Hinduism that do not think of a personal deity or really a deity at all. There are atheistic strands of Hinduism and non-theistic strands of Hinduism. There are also branches that emphasize certain deities as sort of the focus of worship. And then there are branches that say, all deities are the same and thought of equally. The tradition that I'm a part of, and the tradition that a lot of people who are yogic practitioners and Vaishnav, sort of in this strain of Hinduism, God, the gods, there are different personifications of God, but ultimately God is a single unmanifest reality, which it's not an exact parallel to Christianity, but it can be sort of thought of in a similar vein, which is you have God, and then you have representation. You have Jesus, who is the manifestation of God on earth. And of course, if you looked at a tradition like Islam, you would have you have many of those prophets, or Islam's Islam has sort of these messengers of God who come to earth, Jesus being one of them, Muhammad being one of them. And their relationship to God is sort of unique compared to, say, somebody else's. In Hinduism, there are avatars of this unmanifest reality, and those avatars have come at certain points in history and represent different things, represent different aspects of the divine. So Hanuman, which is the monkey god, which is the main sort of deity that the Taos ashram focuses around. They have a murti, a statue of Hanuman that a lot of the worship is done towards. Hanuman is a personification of devotion, of service, of selfless service to another avatar of God, Ram. And there are many different ways that people view these deities. I have some friends who are Indian and who really view the deities as representations of concepts. So not the stories about them, the epics about them are not necessarily taken literally, but are viewed as aspects of the mind. And then there are other people who view these deities as literal beings who were on Earth thousands of years ago, and who come back in different forms. So there are many people who view Maharaji Neem Karoli Baba as an avatar of God who came on Earth at a specific time to help humanity. I think for people who aren't in this tradition, and for me certainly as I was starting to learn more about Hinduism, it can feel almost overwhelming and confusing how complex and how many different ways of viewing, I suppose, the Hindu tradition and relationship to deities is. What I personally find, and what I see in Maharaji's teachings, is that it's really like getting too hung up on that is not really that useful. The goal, to the extent that there's a goal, the goal is to see oneself in God and see God as oneself and act in a way that accords with sort of this divinity. And so some people, the god Krishna really speaks to them as a way of viewing their lives and viewing what's important to them. For other people, Hanuman really speaks to them. At the end of the day, I think it's about what is opening your heart, and there are many people, my guru being one of them, who Christ was really somebody who opened Maharaji's heart. And he would often talk to the Western devotees about Jesus and about how Jesus died for love, and gave himself to humanity. And there's moving stories about, that bringing him to tears, him talking about the crucifixion and Jesus's gift to humanity. And so that's really, I think, the core of these traditions, at least how I view it. The core of the tradition is what is opening your heart, and what is opening your heart to love, and to the love of God, and the love of self, and the love of your fellow man, your fellow human. And so really that's what I guess I would leave everyone with, is there's so much complexity, and it can be easy almost to lose oneself in all of the different ideas and not understanding. I think what this tradition, the Hindu tradition, really speaks to is that it's what's most important is what's in your heart, and how are you moving through the world, and how are you thinking about other people. And yoga, the yogic path, gives tools and suggestions and ways of thinking about the world and thinking about our minds that allows us to become more loving. And those are all invitations to explore one's consciousness and to explore the things, the patterns, the habits that we're in. But none of them are requisite. And thinking about God in a certain way or having a certain view of God is not requisite. One thing that quickly just Maharaji talks about all the time is sub-ek, or all one. So it is all the same. Whatever path you are taking to up the mountain is equally valid, and it's all leading to the same place. And so just in closing, I guess, Maharaji's teachings are summarized by Ram Dass, who was a Westerner, who came to Lama Foundation to write his book, Be Here Now. And Ram Dass is, for many people who find their way to the ashram in Taos, Ram Dass was sort of the light that brought them there. And Ram Dass summarized Maharaji's teachings, Neem Karoli Baba's teachings, as love everyone, serve everyone, feed everyone, tell the truth, remember God. And that's what I'm trying to do. That's what attracted me to Maharaji and to Hinduism. And I view Hinduism in my practice as a way of allowing myself to live out those ideals more of the time, and ultimately to become more and more loving every day. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. And, I think we would all agree that our desire is to become more loving and to love others. And that selfless service are commonalities that we share. So I want to thank you, and I hope it's encouraged us to think more deeply about our own faith and to be open to learning from others. So thank you for sharing your faith experience.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
And now, I'd like to say thank you to all of you who are watching us today, for all the ways that you show love in the world, for all the ways that you make love a part of your life. And some of that includes supporting those things that you consider important, including the Shared Table Food Pantry and El Pueblito Church. Thanks for donating online, for sending in checks or dropping checks off at the church. Thank you for all the ways you show love to your neighbors, to your family, and to our community. May we go in peace, and as we do, may we sing amen, affirming our commitment to love one another. Let's join Claire now. Amen.